You can spend years living inside a sentence you never remember choosing. A quiet sentence. A sentence like, "I'm not ready," or "People like me don't get that far," or "If they really knew me, they'd leave." At first it sounds like caution. Then it becomes your personality. Then slowly, without asking your permission, it becomes the border of your entire life. And the strange part is, reality may keep offering you doors. Not loud, golden doors with angels singing behind them. Just simple doors. A conversation you could have. A chance you could take. A truth you could admit. A version of yourself you could finally stop betraying. But once you've believed your own lies long enough, even an open door starts looking like a trap. That's when reality becomes the enemy. Not because reality hates you, not because life is against you, but because reality keeps showing you evidence that your old story might be false, and the ego would rather fight reality than lose the lie that kept it feeling safe. So you don't just avoid change, you defend the prison, you polish the chains, you call the cage common sense, and somewhere deep down, a part of you knows something is off. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides, "Today I'm going to build an invisible prison around my soul." It doesn't happen like that. Usually, the lie begins as protection. Maybe someone laughed when you expressed yourself too honestly. Maybe love felt unpredictable, so you learned to need less. Maybe every time you tried to be bold, someone reminded you to calm down, be realistic, don't embarrass yourself, don't be too much. And because you were young, you didn't call it conditioning, you called it truth. A child doesn't have the language to say, "These people are wounded, and they're passing their fear into me." A child simply absorbs. If the room feels unsafe when you speak, silence starts to feel wise. If affection only comes when you perform well, perfection starts to feel like love. If your dreams are mocked before they're even allowed to breathe, shrinking starts to feel like maturity. Bit by bit, the mind takes painful experiences and turns them into rules. Not because the rules are true, but because rules make chaos feel manageable. And then years pass. The situation changes, but the rule remains. You're no longer in the old room. You're no longer surrounded by the same voices. You're no longer as powerless as you were when the belief first formed. But your nervous system doesn't always know that. It still whispers, "Careful, don't stand out, don't trust them, don't try too hard, don't want too much." So you begin living as if yesterday is still happening. You treat new people like old wounds. You treat fresh opportunities like familiar threats. That's how a lie learns your name. It stops sounding like fear and starts sounding like intuition. It stops feeling like a wound and starts feeling like identity. You don't say, "I learned to hide." You say, "I'm just a private person." You don't say, "I'm afraid of failing." You say, "I'm being practical." You don't say, "I don't believe I deserve more." You say, "I'm not interested in all that." And maybe part of that is true. Maybe not every dream is yours. Maybe not every path is meant for you. But be honest, there's a difference between peace and resignation. Peace feels open. Resignation feels like a locked door you've gotten used to staring at. Once a belief settles deep enough, it doesn't just sit in your mind like a thought. It becomes a filter, a lens. Almost like your brain starts editing the movie before you ever get to watch it. Someone doesn't text back quickly, and suddenly the story writes itself. They're losing interest. They're upset. They found someone better. You said too much. You weren't enough. Maybe none of that is true. Maybe their phone died. Maybe life got busy. Maybe they're dealing with something they haven't told you. But the old belief doesn't wait for evidence. It rushes in like a bad lawyer, already prepared to argue its case. And because you believe the story, you act from it. You pull away, or you become needy, or you test people, or you pretend not to care. Then the other person feels the shift and responds to your energy, not to the truth of the situation. They become confused, guarded, distant. And then your mind says, "See, I knew it." That's the cruel magic of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You don't simply predict rejection. You start behaving in ways that invite distance, and then you call the distance proof. Same thing happens with success. If you secretly believe you're not capable, you'll look at a good opportunity and feel suspicious. You'll call it pressure. You'll say the timing isn't right. You'll over-prepare until the chance passes, or you'll undercommit so failure feels explainable. And again, the mind says, "See, it wasn't meant for me." But maybe it was meant for you. Maybe the opportunity didn't reject you. Maybe you rejected the version of yourself who would have had to show up for it. Here's where it gets uncomfortable, but also freeing. Your mind doesn't always show you reality. Sometimes it shows you your expectations wearing a costume. Two people can walk into the same room and experience two different worlds. One person sees possibility, another sees judgment. One hears silence and feels peace. Another hears silence and feels abandonment. One receives feedback and thinks, "Good, now I can improve." Another receives the same feedback and thinks, "I knew I was worthless." Same room, same words, different inner worlds. The ancient Stoics had a simple way of saying it. People are disturbed not by things, but by the meanings they give to things. And honestly, that one sentence can sting for a lifetime if you let it. At some point, life will challenge the lie. It always does. Maybe someone genuinely loves you, and instead of receiving it, you feel exposed. Maybe a good opportunity appears, and instead of feeling excited, you feel like you're about to be found out. Maybe someone tells you the truth with kindness, and because it doesn't match the old story, it feels like criticism. Reality knocks gently, but the lie hears an invasion. That's the moment many people turn against the very thing that could free them. A healthy relationship feels boring because chaos became familiar. A peaceful life feels suspicious because struggle became proof of importance. A compliment feels uncomfortable because self-rejection became home. You might even start sabotaging what you prayed for, not because you don't want it, but because having it would force you to become someone who no longer needs the old wound as an explanation. There's a strange loyalty people have to their suffering, not because they enjoy pain, not really, but because pain can become a map. If you've told yourself for years, "I'm the one nobody chooses," then being chosen can feel disorienting. If you've told yourself, "I always mess things up," then stability can feel like waiting for disaster. If you've told yourself, "My voice doesn't matter," then being heard can feel almost embarrassing. The lie becomes familiar furniture in the house of the mind. Ugly furniture, yes. Heavy furniture, but familiar. And sometimes people would rather sit in a familiar sadness than stand in an unfamiliar freedom. So reality becomes the enemy, because reality asks for movement. Reality says, "Try again." The lie says, "Don't be foolish." Reality says, "Speak honestly." The lie says, "You'll be rejected." Reality says, "You're stronger now." The lie says, "No, you're still that same scared version of yourself." And if you don't slow down enough to notice the war inside you, you'll mistake fear for wisdom. You'll think life is blocking you when really, life is waiting for you to stop arguing with the evidence of your own growth. Freedom usually doesn't arrive as a dramatic breakthrough. More often, it begins with one honest question. What if this isn't true anymore? Not, what if everything is perfect? Not, what if fear disappears overnight? Just that one small crack in the wall. What if the belief that once protected you is now preventing you? What if the voice you call realistic is actually exhausted fear repeating old instructions? What if your life feels small, not because your soul is small, but because you keep obeying a version of reality built by pain? Asking that question changes something. You stop treating every thought like a commandment. You begin to notice the difference between a warning and a wound. A warning is clear. A wound is repetitive. A warning helps you respond. A wound keeps you looping. A warning says, "Pay attention." A wound says, "Run, hide, destroy this before it destroys you." Once you learn the difference, your inner world becomes less foggy. Not easy necessarily, but less confusing. Then comes the harder part, acting against the old lie before you fully believe the new truth. Waiting until you feel confident sounds nice, but confidence usually comes after movement, not before. You speak up with a shaking voice. You apply for the thing while feeling underqualified. You let someone care about you without immediately searching for the hidden danger. You create the work before you're sure it's good. You try, fail, adjust, try again, like a child building something with blocks, knocking it over, laughing and rebuilding without turning the mistake into a personality disorder. Children understand something adults forget. Falling is information, not identity. And slowly, reality begins to soften. Not because the world suddenly becomes easy, but because you're no longer meeting life through the armor of an old lie. You start gathering new evidence. One honest conversation doesn't destroy you. One failure doesn't end you. One bold move doesn't make the sky collapse. One person's disapproval doesn't erase your worth. Each new action becomes a vote for a new self. Small vote, quiet vote. But over time, those votes become a new government inside you. A new authority, a new inner law. There's no need to hate the old beliefs. They were trying, in their limited way, to keep you alive. Maybe silence protected you once. Maybe perfection helped you earn approval. Maybe emotional distance helped you survive disappointment. Fine. Thank them if you need to. But don't let yesterday's survival strategy become tomorrow's spiritual contract. At some point, you have to say, "You helped me then, but you can't lead me now." Taking the headset off doesn't mean seeing life with perfect clarity forever. Let's not make it too clean. You'll still get triggered. You'll still misread people sometimes. You'll still feel the old rope tighten around your ankle when you're about to step into something bigger. But now there's awareness, and awareness is no small thing. Awareness is the hand reaching for the knot. Awareness is the pause before reaction. Awareness is the tiny space where the old story says, disappear, and the deeper self says, stay. A powerful life isn't built by never feeling fear. It's built by no longer letting fear write the entire script. You can be afraid and still tell the truth. You can doubt yourself and still move. You can feel unready and still begin. That's where real transformation happens. Not in the fantasy version, where you wake up fearless, glowing, and perfectly healed, but in the ordinary moment where you choose differently while your hands are still trembling. Eventually, reality stops feeling like the enemy, because you stop using it as a courtroom for your old beliefs. You stop looking for proof that you're unwanted, incapable, behind, broken, too late, too much, not enough. You start looking for openings, lessons, patterns, invitations. The same world that once seemed hostile begins to look more honest. And honesty, even when uncomfortable, is kinder than a beautiful lie that keeps you asleep.